Welcome to the Two Stewards Show, saving your money. What an outdated concept that is. Who would ever defer consumption in the present so as to prudently provide for themselves and others in the future? Especially when the vehicle for storing such wealth depletes in value at 7% per year compounded on average. For the ambitious among us, why would you ever save and thus lose 7% per year compounded on average when you could instead invest and earn a positive return on your money? For the cynical and slothful among us, why would you even go to work in the first place? Working is pointless. Saving is broken. Well, today we are joined by Nathan Fitzsimmons, who is here to help open our eyes to an incredible modern savings technology that changed his life. And now he's dedicating his life to helping others transform their lives also. Can a simple, relentless software protocol enable saving once again? What does life look like when savings actually works? You can learn more about what Nathan is up to at bitcoinmentor.io. Nathan is not a professing Christian, but our prayer is maybe the one life transformation may lead to another bigger life transformation. To get in touch with the show, visit twostewards.ca. Remember, this show is not financial advice, but is valuable for listening amusement purposes. Now, can we fix savings technology?
Hey everybody, we're back, and today we've got a guest, special guest, very special guest. His name is Nathan Fitzsimmons the third. No, sorry, it's not the third. I just feel like with a name like that, there's got to be some.
I feel like I should start adding that to my title. Just like assume there was some beforehand. Like, oh, yeah, it's the third.
Yeah, aspiring royalty.
The Earl of Sandwich.
Oh, favorite food.
Welcome, Nathan.
Anyways, welcome. We're already off track, 30 seconds in. But yeah, Nathan is with the Bitcoin Mentor. So we're going to be talking about Bitcoin this episode. And yeah, we'll get into what is the Bitcoin Mentor as well. But yeah, Nathan, how do you get into a thing like Bitcoin and working in Bitcoin with, so you have like a science background, I guess we would say, right?
Correct, yeah.
You're like a lab rat? I mean, lab tech?
No, absolutely. It's a bit of a weird roundabout journey, and I feel like for most people coming into Bitcoin, it's something similar. Like I am very blessed to be working in the space, and I couldn't be absolutely thrilled and happy about it because I don't know if you guys have had this interaction with people in your life as well too, but I wasn't happy where I was beforehand. And it didn't even necessarily come down to the work, but it came down to kind of not being able to be my true self and having to falsify around people who didn't necessarily share my values and beliefs. And so backtracking for a bit here, I worked in medical research in particular for years. It was a niche field that I got into, and I worked my way kind of into a position that, you know, necessarily I shouldn't have had. If you look at all my peers in the space, they were much more qualified than I was. They were postdocs and PhDs, and I was just this lonely BSc who just found his way in there just trying to be helpful and productive. But you can imagine, so it would have been around maybe 2013, 14, somewhere in there, I started kind of going down that Austrian economics rabbit hole and diving into libertarian philosophy and kind of history and money, these things too. And so I had that prerequisite and I found it fascinating, and it really was. And it's funny because you kind of have that normalcy bias. I assumed that everybody was like me, but that is not true in the sense that I was a musician. I was a punk kid, and I liked hanging out in the pub and hanging out in the bars, and we'd always get into little rows, into little fights. And the majority of the people that I surrounded myself with in the music scene were like more or less communist, very much so kind of on the left side. And I didn't share those beliefs or values as much more. I had an entrepreneurial family and always saw the value there. And so in wanting to win debates in bars, I started researching more on economic theory. And I had this idea that's like, look, if I can just show them like logically, consistently, here's why that argument doesn't work, that they would change their mind. But they didn't. They never do, right? It's always usually coming from an emotional position.
These are not physical fights. They're like verbal jousting.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay. A good old row in a dark bar at the end of the night.
That's less exciting.
Go on. Little less exciting. If I broke out on occasion, but a little less exciting. And so as I continued down this, I always just had this drive that I wanted to be kind of correct. And so I came to this theory and started exploring, and Mises and Rothbard, and even just modern like Dr. Bob Murphy and like Tom Woods, and kind of finding myself in those kind of libertarian circles. And so going down this path, believing that it is correct and learning more about it, being in a Canadian university environment is not necessarily the most welcoming place to be. I always had to watch what I said, not really share my opinions, and pretend to be somebody that I wasn't. And I found it incredibly frustrating and demoralizing, and I did not enjoy my time there. I couldn't, right? Because I couldn't just be me. And even over the pandemic, like, things got worse in the sense that, like, the one friend, it was my one buddy, and him and I used to get into talks about Christianity all the time because he was very, very devout. It was a big part of his life and his views, that we'd have these wonderful conversations about it. And he was my one buddy. We could go for lunch, get coffee, hang out, and chat. And they canned him. They canned him over the lockdowns, right? They were cutting people left, right, and center. And so I really had, like, nobody there, nobody to talk to, nobody to spend my time with. And at that point in time in my life, the reason that this leads to Bitcoin is it was very much a nihilistic position. I was kind of in an economic nihilistic position. It was, okay, gold is the right answer, but it's naturally centralizing. We've tried it before. There's a reason, like I see broken money hanging out there behind you on the shelf there, Mark. There's a reason that gold-backed currency doesn't work. The tangibility ends up being kind of a constraint on it. And why fiat currency moving at the speed of telecommunications was so important. And so I was sitting in a position of, like, I know the right answer. I know what we should do, but because human's going to human, it's never going to work out. We're kind of screwed. And then it was in that I'd heard about Bitcoin a few times along the way, but I had never had any money, right? I never had anything to invest. And again, the culture is not around savings or preparing for the future. It's like, can't bother, can't get ahead, not going to worry about it. And it was for the first time in my life, coming up in 2019, that I actually had a bit of savings. I had some money that I was trying to put together for a down payment. And this was new for me. I had taken, going back to those bar days, I kind of had a moment in time where I could see into the future of where things were going if I continued on this trajectory. And again, conversations with friends that had better values than I did at the time kind of steered me in the right direction. And I realized, like, okay, if I don't make changes now, where I'm going to be in 5 years is at best pathetic. That I'm not going to a good place. I don't like what this looks like. I kind of saw, like, to take an extreme example, I kind of saw like a hell in front of me. And then I started to imagine the heaven that I want to get to. I want wife and kids and family. But if I'm going to pull that off, I've got to be the kind of person that would attract the kind of person that I want. Mm-hmm. And so start to make some shifts, start to save, met what would become my wife, going down this path. And now we fast forward to 2019, and I see the writing on the wall from the early signs of what's going to happen with the pandemic. And some of the, again, I had some good sources that were coming out, libertarian circles that were talking about, hey, there's this thing going on in China. You kind of want to get ready for it. And so it's like, I got to put my money in gold. I know exactly how this is going to play out. They are going to print. I have got to throw my money in gold or I am going to be screwed. The real estate is just going to continue to run away from me. But I had this, like, little voice in the back of my head that went, like, maybe we should look at Bitcoin again. Maybe we should just double tap on that again, see if maybe that's a better option. A little bit easier to custody. You're not going to get so much of a haircut moving in and out of fiat. I got to check this thing out. And so the one major benefit that I did have about my current position at the university is it allowed me to listen to, like, audiobooks and podcasts all day long. Like 7 hours a day, I'm just consuming anything and everything I can get my hands onto. And so I dove straight...
Did you get paid for that too?
Oh, yeah. It was just...
Bitcoin? Not in Bitcoin.
That comes a little bit later. It was the... head first down the rabbit hole. And I'm trying to remember where I picked this up. I think it was Knut Svanholm that mentioned this to me before, but someone was talking about, no, it was Gary Cardone. I was having a conversation with him that we don't go down the rabbit hole. We get dragged down the rabbit hole. And that's absolutely what happened to me. I consumed everything, like, that I could.
You already kind of were reading all this stuff. So for some of our listeners, like, they haven't read Austrian economics, like all the books and the people that you're talking about, and you kind of had that theory in that background. But it sounds like you've been in this mindset before Bitcoin was introduced to you. Like, did you see it when Bitcoin came into your life? You're like, wait a minute.
That was exactly it. That was the preparation necessarily for it, is that I was already aware of the problem, but that nihilism came from thinking that there wasn't a solution. So when I actually came in contact with the workable solution, the one that actually can get us out of this fiat trap, I was unbelievably, I just kicking myself for not, because all I had to do was take a second look at it, right? It was one of those things that, like, I'd had some touch points. I'd heard about it in libertarian circles. I'd heard people mention it, but I go, that's not for me. But as soon as I just took a couple of hours, because I had that framework, I was open to the ideas to begin with. And again, I've always had this pursuit of truth, kind of just personality-wise, that you're right. I was primed, and then I just ran with it.
Yeah, interesting. Because, I think a lot of people, they might see it, they might dismiss it right away, and if they don't have the background in economic theory or, what is the value of sound money?
Yep.
They're kind of living in a system where, you're like the frog, right? That boils slowly and you don't really see it. And then Bitcoin comes about. It's like, Bitcoin, what is this? It's not even like real. It's not tangible. All these kind of excuses, right? So once you got into it, that's one thing to get, I guess, into Bitcoin yourself and buy some and interact with it and whatnot, and get dragged down the rabbit hole, so to speak. It's another thing to kind of like align your whole life with it and start the Bitcoin mentor and become like working in the space. So how do you get to that point? And you're obviously so passionate about it. So
it's the optimism that I got with it as well too, right? I finally had almost like this return to hope that we can actually affect change and we can make for a better world. We can build something there. That's incredibly energizing. The other thing too is even going back to that kind of feelings of isolation and loneliness is that I found a community, a tribe that I had something in common with, that I at least felt like I wasn't crazy anymore. And so getting into working in the space was realizing for my own sanity and for what I felt like I wanted to, early on, I picked up this advice from, what was his name? Dirty Jobs, Micro. He said, don't follow your passion, but bring your passion with you. And I had that mentality, but I saw that there was an opportunity that I might be actually able to align what I do with my passion, with these sort of values with Bitcoin. And so in continuing to learn, and again, a lot of it was just natural curiosity. I wanted to understand everything. I had a background not only in biology, but also in computer science as well, too. So I wanted to understand how everything kind of worked under the hood. And I just started looking for opportunities. I started doing additional education. I knew that I had to get out of the university environment. It wasn't the place that I was meant to be. And so I kept just my eyes out for jobs and positions and started applying, started trying to meet people in the space, going to local meetups, going to local events, and just plug myself in and see what comes. I mean, I've heard this reference several times before, like luck is just a combination of preparation and timing. And I just happened to come across a job posting. I had no idea that both the founders of the company also resided in Calgary, Alberta. And I just started working for them for Bitcoin Mentor as a consultant, right? It was just a side hustle to bring in some extra income because, again, keeping up with prices and inflation these days is unbelievably difficult. So it was a side hustle for extra income. I absolutely loved what I was doing because I was getting paid to talk about Bitcoin, to consult and help onboard people and educate them. And I just kept devoting time and energy to the project, not expressly out of a goal of even necessarily like doing it full time, but because it was in and of itself rewarding. And I loved the people that I was spending my time with. So
that's where your story goes. And I think we'll maybe get into Bitcoin Mentor a little bit more at the end, but Bitcoin itself. So yes. What is Bitcoin to you? Like what problem does it solve for somebody who's like, look, I don't have anything to do with Bitcoin. I don't want it. Like, why do I need it?
The reason that you need Bitcoin is it's a base layer protocol from which you can build other things and extractions on top of, which is a little bit obscure, but I'll try and put it in this sort of framework, is that we as humans are naturally flawed and we tend to succumb to corruption. If not, it's just a matter of time. Like you could have the most benevolent king, but a couple generations later, isn't necessarily going to be the same person. The problem that we have with our existing monetary system is that they have the ability to impact the amount of currency in circulation. They can direct it to the things that they see bet, and that's ultimately going to distort price signals. It's going to cause problems in the economy. It's essentially going to strip everybody their purchasing power. The issue that we have is that having control over the money printer is such an unbelievably powerful thing to have that it will in time at least attract the wrong kind of person. And they, even whether it be for malicious reasons or just mistakes, they will use it in a way that disincentivize proper productive activities and hurts all the users of the currency. So what is the problem that Bitcoin is solving? Is that ultimately, if you look to something like gold, right? The history with gold, the reason that it worked as a money was there's kind of different characteristics: fungibility, durability, recognizability, scarcity. There's a reason that cultures all around the world converged on gold as the best money, a commodity money at the time. We need a way of keeping record of basically who owes who what and who's kind of produced value for others that cannot be controlled by other people. Because again, the ability to change the ledger is the main issue. Now, The problem with gold is the fact that it's tangible. It's difficult to verify, particularly in large amounts, right? That's why you see a lot of people that store gold will keep like 1 ounce coins. With bars, you run the risk of having tungsten or something else in between. You got to melt the whole thing down. It's a huge process. It's difficult to secure because if I actually have to move it to you, I physically have to transport it, right? There's that risk of theft, that risk of loss all along the way. So with the invention of the telecommunication age, commerce started moving at a much faster pace, right? Historically, economic activity could only move at the same speed at which gold did. If I was going to bring you some cattle, I could bring the gold with it, right? Like we had to move physically around the world, but as soon as we started trading over basically telephone lines, gold can't move or settle that fast. We abstracted into the current banking system that we have today and ultimately depegged from gold. The benefit to Bitcoin, the reason that we need it being a digital native currency, is that it has those features of gold that are so critical for making sure that everyone's playing by a fair and honest game. It's a transparent ledger, which nobody can change. Nobody can update somebody else's records, but it can move at the speed of commerce today. So it's almost like taking the best of the current banking infrastructure and combining it with all the best features of gold to give us a ledger that, instead of being controlled by a centralized group of banks, is controlled literally by no one.
Yeah, so it's almost like you can say that, but how do I know that's true? Like I have this in my own head, right? I'm like, okay, with gold, like I can walk out in the field and I don't see gold. Okay, well, it's pretty scarce. Like, you know,
Yeah.
like people have been trying to mine this forever. But with Bitcoin, especially trying to talk to somebody maybe of an older generation is like didn't grow up with the internet necessarily, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a lot, of course, tech savvy old people like Mark.
Sorry, what's that? I fell asleep.
No, Mark is quite tech savvy, but just like, how do you actually learn about this? So Bitcoin Mentor, you're teaching people about it and onboarding people and helping them buy it. But like, do you need to go and study code? How do you get this level of confidence?
It comes through kind of, one, it's time, and it's super nerve-wracking when you first get in, because it's everything that you don't know about computer science combined with everything that you don't know about money, right? It's just a giant rabbit hole. And so usually first and foremost is like understanding what the problem is, seeing the problem with the existing fiat currency system, with the commercial banking system and the central banking system. From there, it's like, okay, I know what the problem is, so we can kind of start to identify what the solution is. Now, one of the best ways to learn about it is to just start to play with it and also recognize that there's kind of parallels already in existence. Yes, in terms
And
of
when you say play with it, you mean like just
get
buy
some.
some.
Yeah. Where your money goes, your mind follows as well too. So it'll have more of your attention, you'll have more curiosity and be more interested. There's a ton of free resources out there. So in terms of like what we do and what I do, there's actually two companies that I work for, and both are related. There's a co-founder between the two of them. We have BTC Sessions on YouTube, where I contribute content and work behind the scenes as well too. And then we have Bitcoin Mentor. BTC Sessions is free Bitcoin tutorials every week, every app, every wallet, anything you could possibly need. It's all there. And the same thing goes for, there are free books online, free guides, tons of podcasts. Information ultimately wants to be free, and the constraint tends to be people's available time. So on the consulting side of things, really what we're doing is just getting people where they want to go when they want to be into Bitcoin, they want to be in a secure setup, and we're just fast tracking them there. They're entrepreneurs, they're retirees, they're investors, they're professionals, doctors, lawyers. That it's not that they can't go through the available of free content, it's that time is their restriction there as well too. So in terms of learning about Bitcoin, shout out, go to btcsessions.ca. btcsessions.ca/learn. There's a plethora of free stuff there. And again, a lot of great material out there. You can just start to pick up some books. Broken Money, again, hidden right behind Mark there. There's a lot of wonderful authors. You can even get, it's from Swan has Inventing Bitcoin from Jan Pritzker available for free. So if you like that kind of traditional learning stream, there's that. But again, there's kind of nothing better than getting your hands a little bit dirty and trying some. Get a small amount, move it on to a Bitcoin hot wallet. Think of it as your cost of education, even if you lost it or made a mistake, to start to play with this, to start to familiarize yourself with it. In terms of understanding it, it's not very sorry, let me just back up there for a second. Bitcoin is not very difficult, but it is complicated in the same sense that, like, if I had no mechanical skills and I'm looking at a car engine, it's completely overwhelming. However, if I take it in component and chunk by chunk, it's actually not too bad what each unit is actually doing and contributing to the whole system. So the pieces of the system are not too bad to get your head around. It's just that there's a lot of them working together and in tandem. And so going back to like even how could I know these things? Most people, the code is completely open source and verifiable. You can run the code yourself and verify that the Bitcoin you have is in fact the Bitcoin you have. The motto in the space is don't trust, verify. But again, a lot of people, it's be a bit of a tall order in terms of looking at the code. So it's kind of a working towards that. You can sift through some pieces. But again, even just going to the abstract, start by understanding that there's a 21 million supply cap and then start to try and figure out, okay, but how is that enforced?
Right.
You know, yeah, so I'll talk to people once in a while about this too, and they're like, oh, it's so complicated, there's so much to learn. I'm like, have you looked at fiat?
Yeah.
Like, I've been on a journey for a while, and I still don't understand how the fiat system totally works, like the plumbing behind it. Like, you think of, traditional idea, right? You put your money in the bank, and then the bank lends that money out, and then you find out about, this fractional reserve banking. What's that? Okay, fine. But then when you get then you look at the Fed and, money printing, QE, interbank liquidity, like overnight, reverse repo, like all this stuff. It's like, wow, this is super, super complicated. And I don't think there's many people who actually fully understand how the fiat system works. And so that's a bit of a rebuttal I'll have when people are like, oh, Bitcoin is so complicated. I'm like, okay, you could put your faith in that and your savings in that, but like, have you looked at fiat?
Well, I was gonna say, yeah, it's not what's in the bank account is not money, and it's not yours, right? It's an unbelievably complex. A lot of people still have the kind of it's like the old narrative. They still think that it's backed by something. They don't even necessarily realize, like, when you go to the commercial banking system and you get out a mortgage, that's not coming out of Brent's account and then they're giving it and loaning it to you. They're literally creating that money out of thin air at the creation of that loan through dual accounting, right? Through asset and liability accounting. Like, it's unbelievably complex and inefficient, and we've just kind of glued it together and kept the system going. So you're right. When you compare it to the alternatives, it's actually pretty simple. And the other thing that I always like to remind people too, particularly, is that, look, if you can take a piece of steel with explosive fuel and run it down the highway at 100 clicks, right? If you can drive a car, you can do Bitcoin, right? If you can raise a kid, if raising a kid is infinitely more complex and difficult than understanding Bitcoin.
Go ahead.
So I'm just curious, has Bitcoin changed how you look at, I don't know, kids, family? Because I think you mentioned even before you're getting into Bitcoin, you realized, like, I need to make some changes if I, be the person, I don't know what the saying is, but like be somebody worth being with. I think that sounds like that came before you, but has that changed your view on sort of family and kids and that sort of thing?
Oh, 100%. And it's very pervasive in the space too. Like, if I look back at my old like fiat life friends that I have over there, they're not having kids, they're not getting married. It's kind of a very hedonistic, short-term thinking lifestyle. And then in the Bitcoin space, it feels like Bitcoiners are popping out kids left, right, and center. They're getting married. I see a huge influx. There's a huge crossover between Christianity and Bitcoin as well too. And I think it comes from that. Bitcoin means taking responsibility for your finances. It is like a high level of personal responsibility. And I think and it's also a pursuit of truth and understanding, regardless of where the culture and zeitgeist might be. And I think that's why there's major overlap. It's a return to both optimism and hope and long-term planning and thinking. Most of the people that I know in the space, right, they don't have intentions of spending their Bitcoin on themselves. They're thinking of it like a legacy asset. They're thinking ahead that I can actually build something and leave the world in a better place. I can make an incredible future for my kids. It really shifts your time horizon. And when you're doing that, it's so simple. Like, what did Bitcoin do? We invented savings. That's all it is. We reinvented savings. You don't have to be a broker. You don't have to be a trader. It's just going back to a money that you can actually save in. And when you can plan and gather resources, essentially have capital accrued to protect you against the uncertainty of the future, you can start to think into bigger projects, bigger plans, bigger things. What's meaningful, right? If I don't have to waste time, this is what I love about being married and being in Bitcoin. If I don't have to think about like relationship and like finding a partner and finding a mate and all these things too, that's taken care of. She's great. If I don't have to think about like where I'm going to accrue my capital, what am I going to do with my money after it, I can just focus on being the absolute best of my craft and then being with my family. And that's it. I can set those things aside and put my energy where it's needed most.
So, yeah, okay. So, like, where do you hold your Bitcoin though? Right. So this is another thing I talk to people about sometimes. And
It's not physical, Mark. You can't hold it.
well, exactly. But, people got a little bit crazy about this whole self-custody thing. It's like, look, I could buy the ETF and, I have a diversified portfolio because everybody knows that you have to have a diverse, a 60-40 split between stocks and bonds.
That's not done so well lately. There's a reason Ray Dalio quit.
Yeah, but Warren Buffett. Anyways, so I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the self-custody thing, because I think that's a big piece as well, right? So it's one thing to I'll buy the ETF or whatever, and I got some Bitcoin, right? That's my money. It's my Bitcoin. What do you have to say about that?
The problem is that you don't have Bitcoin, right? The biggest benefit of Bitcoin is it's completely trustless, censorship resistant, unseizable if held correctly, and trustless. You don't have to trust anybody. You can run and verify everything by yourself and have it in your own custody. As soon as you're leaving it with an exchange or an ETF, you're kind of like returning back to the banking system. You're trusting somebody else. You've got a Bitcoin IOU. You don't have Bitcoin at that point. You just have a Bitcoin IOU. And history is littered with exchanges that have blown up, gone insolvent. We recently had like FTX, before that Quadriga CX in Canada, before that like Mt. Gox. This happens repeatedly. You don't want to have to trust somebody. Not your keys, not your Bitcoin is a saying for a reason. However, I will point out, everyone's going to be at a different place in their life. They're going to have a different situation, different time horizon. Are they retired on fixed income? What it might be. So would getting the ETF be of benefit for a lot of people? Yeah, I still think it would. It has a place there, but that place there is purely for price exposure. You're introducing risk now because you have to trust somebody else, and you're also going to have that capital kind of slowly whittle away because now we've got fees on top of it. If you're holding Bitcoin yourself, there's no fees for holding it, and you're not trusting anybody else. You've got it yourself. It's a bearer instrument. The analogy that I like to use is it's the same as like if you would understand why you'd want to have gold bars or gold coins versus GLD, it's the same sort of thing. So if it's purely just like, you know what, I'd like a little bit of price exposure, I think this is going to continue, and I really don't want to take custody, okay, that makes sense, right? Everyone's going to kind of get to that or have what's most important to them. The benefit is that when you have Bitcoin and self-custody, that's where you not only get the number go up aspect, but you get the freedom go up aspect, and that's incredibly, incredibly powerful, and I do want to stress that.
What do you mean by that? Just a little bit, like to dig into the freedom.
100%. So I'll give you a couple examples. So first and foremost is that in Bitcoin, everything is built off of what's called a private key. The most important thing I have to just stress is that that's what you're ultimately protecting. Ownership of Bitcoin is synonymous with control. If I have basically the 77-digit password, I can move the Bitcoin, I can update the ledger, so I have control of it, therefore I have ownership of it. Now that private key information can be summarized in what's called a recovery phrase or seed phrases, and you would see these anytime you set up a Bitcoin wallet as 12 words. Where the real power comes into this is that you could take 12 words, you could memorize 12 words and take the entirety of your net worth anywhere with you in the world. No one could stop you. No one could steal it from you. No one could take it from you. You could have your entire net worth just memorized in your head, go across any border, go to any country, and have complete access to your Bitcoin. That's really powerful from a kind of sovereign individual standpoint. To take a real example as well, too. Oh, is it there on the shelf? I bet it is. To take a real world example, if you remember back in the trucker protests, we had a lot of people that wanted to donate to the truckers in Ottawa. Now, there was two funds that were set up there. Originally, we had GoFundMe, and I believe I have the numbers correct. I think it was like 12.1 million, something like that, in donations for the truckers during that protest. Again, people expressing what their values were, wanting to show what was important to them, express what was most important to them through their money, which is the ultimate vote, right? You can vote with your dollars. So 12 million that was supposed to go to the truckers. GoFundMe said, nope, we're not doing it. We're going to keep the funds, and we're going to give it to what we think are worthy causes. Now, they panicked under threat of litigation and ultimately just returned that money to the donors, but that money never got there. So then Give, Send, Go stepped up and said, hey, it's not for us to judge what people want to put their money towards or where they want to donate it. We promise that if you donate to us, we will give it to the truckers. And so they tried to do it. They got the money. I believe it was like 13.4, somewhere in there. It was a little bit more. Maybe it was 13.1 million to Give, Send, Go. As soon as that money crossed over into the Canadian financial rails, as soon as it hit, I think it was TD Bank, it may be wrong on that, but as soon as it got to a Canadian bank, it was immediately seized and frozen. And you remember they were freezing people's transactions during this time as well too. They were freezing people's bank in Canada. They were freezing people's bank accounts for donations as little as like $50. It was absolutely ridiculous. But that highlights the risk of the banking system that was already there. The only money that made it to the intended recipients that could not be stopped digital money was Bitcoin. Originally they set up and it was the owner and the founder of BTC Sessions YouTube channel and co-founder of Bitcoin Mentor that I work for, Mr. Ben Perrin. He set up the Bitcoin donations. And originally they were thinking that like, okay, we're going to get like maybe $5,000, a nice little thing. Bitcoiners from around the world can contribute to the protests that are going on right now. They ended up getting, I believe, $1 million donated to them. And to think of how incredibly powerful this is, it was $1 million of financial purchasing power that went through basically a $300 Raspberry Pi computer that he had hanging out on his shelf. He did all that. He basically was his own bank, both custodying and relaying it through a small computer in his home. And the majority of the funds did get to them. Now, again, the Canadian government went after it hard. Some of it was seized. And again, Bitcoin was never hacked. It was never taken. They got to the person who had control over it. And that's currently still waiting litigation. But Bitcoin was the only money that the Canadian government, the US government, the Chinese government, none of these people can stop you from transacting. It's a completely voluntary system where you have control, and that's unbelievably powerful. Even currently, on that same note, Ben was just in Oslo for the Oslo Freedom Forum, and human rights activists all over the world are learning about and using Bitcoin to get around basically tyrannical regimes that have either kicked them off the financial system or are basically trying to censor them from being able to receive money. Bitcoin is money that even tyrants can't stop. And that's what I mean by the freedom aspect, is that really at the end of the day, you're in control, which means you have unbelievable amounts of power, but it also means you have the responsibility for custodying that properly.
Yeah, so this is kind of going back to like the ETF, right? Like taking ownership of it, having those keys versus just owning kind of a share in an ETF or whatever, like, right? Just having the physical keys.
Well, I think it just proves the point that Bitcoin is for terrorists.
Well, if you ever watched the Tuttle Twins, the terrorist might be you. Which, shout out if you haven't checked out. That's a wonderful cartoon series.
I gotta show you my phone because Mark keeps texting me pictures of the Tuttle Twins. Here, look at this. You got
it's Adam Smith. They got Adam Smith on there.
Yeah.
That is my favorite form of childhood propaganda. I absolutely love it, and so do the kids.
I want to go back to, because you talked about Bitcoin. Basically, you invented savings, and we kind of glossed over that a little bit, but I feel like that's super profound. Just like, where did savings go in the past generation? Like our generation, my grandma always taught me, it's like, okay, put your money in the bank. Like here's a toonie, save it, right? And that's how I grew up. And you work hard and then you save your money. And that was like the smart or prudent or what, like in our podcast, stewardship, right? Like we're trying to use what we have well, we got to first save it. And like that was drilled into, like, I feel like the previous generation, they had this and it worked out.
Yep.
But something went wrong. And when you say Bitcoin is savings, like reinvented, like how would you describe that?
Well, essentially, you're right, because what the problem was, and savings is still a good idea, and essentially we're trying to do it in roundabout ways that leave us, again, tired and broke and taking on risk unnecessarily. The idea of, again, saving for the future, accruing capital, building towards something else has always been the right idea. And while there were many points in time over history, essentially you can tie it back to most easily 1971, right? The end of the gold-backed dollar, when Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard and everyone was essentially pegged from the Bretton Woods Agreement to the U.S. dollar. And so the problem is that right now, and I hate to say it, but like if you're saving in Canadian dollars, you're losing. Savers are losers. There's no way around that, because the money that you have in the bank is essentially, or the money they have under your pillow is a melting ice cube. What it can get you each year is declining at an increasingly rapid rate. Now they'll tell you, like even over the pandemic, I think it got as high, it may have touched double digits, but even the numbers that they're reporting, you need only go to the grocery store to realize like everything is way more expensive. Your salary, the money that you had beforehand, gets you way less. And wealth isn't actually dollars. Dollars are just essentially a tool for intermediating commerce, but wealth is your access to goods and services. That's what you really want to have. Nobody wants dollars in and of themselves. They want what they can get it for. Even the same with Bitcoin. And so the money is broken. It is a debt-backed currency that forever has to basically continue being debased and being worth less and less every year. And so if you are saving, that means you'll have less for that money in the following year. The horrible incentive of the other side is that you're actually taking out debt. You're actually getting a bit of a benefit from the Cantillon effect. Essentially, if you take out debt, they're issuing new currency, which you get to spend now, which will then technically devalue the currency that everybody else is currently holding on to. right? So it
Which we
forces
love.
us, which we love.
Well, we're both in real estate. I don't know if I mentioned that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well,
Both
yeah.
in the real estate space, and we get it. It's what investors have been doing for a long time, right? Just get as close as you can to that trough.
That's exactly it. You've got to get, and in real estate, because of mortgages at low interest rate, that's why that gets such a big boost. And why the unfortunate thing is that, and I've got so many people that I work with that are coming out of the real estate space because they're also, like me being a libertarian, they're primed to see what the problem is. Because, I mean, it only takes a moment of clarity. Like, my house is worth way more than it was when I bought it just a few years ago. And I got 3 kids. It's not better. Like, it's arguably a lot worse than when I got this thing, right? It's not like I've poured in all these, I redeveloped things. Like, no, there's holes in the wall and the carpet's worse. And, like, it's a durable consumer good that takes a lot of input in order to maintain. It should not be accruing in value, but because we don't have savings, Canadians in particular have turned their homes into a savings vehicle, right? How much of the overinflated prices is just a monetary premium because we have nowhere to stick our money because the money itself is broken. And so you're forced into, using leverage to get into real estate to have additional properties. And if then you're dealing with landlord issues, geographical risk, if there's some sort of change in the regulations of your area. Like, again, I'm not big in the space but what I hear about being like a landlord in Vancouver is like, that sucks, right? If you have a bad tenant, you're in a terrible position. And again, even right now, it looks like we're having a correction both in Ontario, at least in the condo market, both Ontario and Vancouver. Lucky in Alberta, it seems like we're staying flat, but maybe we're just catching up, or all you guys are coming here. But
Yeah.
the dentist, the entrepreneur, they shouldn't have to be a financial day trader or an investor, right? No one's doing due diligence if they're throwing stuff into the S&P 500, right? They just know that they have to do something to try and keep up with inflation. That's the problem. That's the thing that's been robbed from them. That we're not supposed to be gambling and speculating and taking on risk, buying into companies that we know absolutely nothing about. You should be able to be the best real estate developer. You should be able to be just the best dentist. And then whatever you have left over at the end of the day that you have because you did not consume, right? That's one of those things that always really, really gets to me about more of the left position, the left wing side of like Canada, is that if you're a business owner or a professional or a service provider and you've accrued a ton of wealth, that's because you offered that much value to other people and didn't reciprocally consume. You benefited your entire neighborhood, your community. They all got something out of it. And you said, nope, I don't need anything right now. And the fact that you can't just do that and accrue it and save it for a rainy day or save it for retirement, that you have to do all these crazy financial games that are constantly accelerating and taking on additional risk, that's the problem. You should be able to just be best doctor and then save in Bitcoin and be done.
Yeah. Well, because like saving is a good virtue to have. So like the wisdom of previous generations, like, oh, let's save. That is a good piece of advice. It's just the vehicle that you're saving in. And it sounds like with Canadian dollars anyways, is not, sound vehicle to save in. So then the modern day wisdom is, well, invest it or risk it. Like you said, right? Go find all these other things. And, that's not for everybody, right? People are going to get lost, lose their money, get burned, whatever else.
100%, right? You're buying into equity that you know nothing about. And additionally, I'll just even throw out there quickly as well too, is that the biggest thing is like the only thing more scarce than Bitcoin is time. And how much time are you wasting on these, like trying to understand what you're investing in when you really should be focusing on your health, your fitness, your family, your business, right? That's the one thing that we can never get back, and it's being stolen from you.
Yeah. Oh,
Stonks, baby. That's all I got to say.
That's how
stonks.
ridiculous it's getting, right? They're not even pretending that they're good companies anymore. It's purely speculative meme gambling.
Well, I saw a chart the other day. Like if you look at the S&P over the last, I can't remember now, 20 years or something, without the Mag 7, like the top 7 stocks, it was flat.
Yep.
Flat or
Price it in
loss.
gold, it's down.
What's that?
Price it in gold or Bitcoin, it's down.
Yeah, like wow. It's just that whole idea that you have to have a second job, basically, right? So investing your money, whatever money is left over, now you have to like go invest it again or save it. You got to save it twice, essentially.
It's traditional finance, right? That was the big psyop, right? It's not traditional finance. Traditional finance was just saving.
So one of the pushbacks that I hear, so in I guess in just the broader public like saving is good if you're saving in a sound vehicle. So if you save in Bitcoin, that's good for you, and it's good for society. You build capital, you defer consumption, you end up, having more purchasing power in a year rather than less. So it further incentivizes saving, which is great. But then if you talk to business owners or investors, like their big pushback on it. So these are people who usually have some extra money that they could allocate to Bitcoin. And they usually have a higher propensity for risk, and they maybe, they've analyzed all kinds of different stuff. So they know how to spot an opportunity. They look at Bitcoin and they say, okay, like there's something here, but it doesn't produce like a dividend or a cash flow or some sort of payment now in the present. Like, whereas if I bought this, I'm actually getting paid on a monthly basis. So have you had that pushback?
Oh, tons. And again, that just goes back to, like, you can't explain water to a fish, right? Is that they're living in a system where if there's not additional yield, and yield means risk, right? If there's a yield on it, like gold has no yield, Bitcoin has no yield, right? It's just a savings vehicle. Oil has no yield, right? Companies can. And when you invest in a company, you're looking for something like that, it's usually because you have some sort of advantage. You can bring something to the table to improve their business, or you think they've got a really good product market fit and it's going to take off. But the desire for cash flow is just because cash is trash. That it needs to be that and more. And again, if you're doing that, it means you're taking on additional risk. There's no way around that, right? You're continuing to pile on risk. Plus, if you're to comparatively look at something like Bitcoin, it's a little bit down at the moment, but it's CAGR, right? Its compounded annual growth rate is like usually around 30%. It's like, okay, you got 4% and you got some 4% dividends. Okay, so you're sitting at 8, but I'm sitting at 30. Usually for most people, what I get the pushback on is the volatility, but that comes from, again, huge information asymmetry. It's a nascent asset monetizing for the first time. But however, anybody who's held on for 4 years plus, it's always up and to the right? There's no one who's down after a 4-year holding people. So it even forces you to have that long-term horizon. I would not suggest necessarily getting into Bitcoin if you're thinking of going in and out quick. It tends to rip most people's faces off.
Oh, that's where all those people came from, those people with no faces. Oh, so is this going to be a big threat to the dollar?
A lot of people will tell you no, but ultimately yes. And because the reason being is that monetary networks, monetary assets tend to converge onto one. There's a reason that the world... So what ended up happening with kind of divergence from gold as well too is that money is supposed to be a number of things. One easy way to explain it is kind of medium of exchange, store of value, and unit of account, right? This is kind of the three groups that people mostly look at. And the two, they're all interrelated. You can't have one without the other. You can't have a store of value unless I can exchange it later on, right? They're inseparable, but it's a wonderful framework to work with. And what we ended up happening is basically the currency in the world, if we're looking at the US dollar, which is the world reserve currency, it's functioning as that unit of account and that medium of exchange, but it's no longer the store of value. That's been pushed to the stock market, to bonds and treasuries, to gold, to other things, right? They split it up. With Bitcoin, it's a return to both. It can be the unit of account, it can be your medium of exchange, and it can be your store of value because no one can debase the currency. There's the reason being that the U.S. is number one is that networks tend to it's network effects. They tend to have a winner-take-all kind of a monopoly system, right? And so if everyone's trading in U.S. dollar, you don't have any benefit by trying to force somewhere else. You get the benefit by participating in the largest network. So ultimately, you would get in there as well too. So will that happen necessarily anytime soon? I don't know. I don't know how it will necessarily transition, but ultimately, if Bitcoin is the better money, if it's the better currency, it will become the largest network and you have no benefit from remaining in the existing one. That ultimately most people voluntarily will move that way. And it likely comes from a producer standpoint, particularly you think about things like energy companies. If you're out there drilling oil and selling your energy on market, right? And these dollars are just melting away. Again, it's harder for us in Canada and the US, but if you take a more extreme example, like, what's it called? Like if we go to Zimbabwe, where they had $1 trillion notes at one point in time, or Venezuela, or Lebanon right now, or even Turkey, right? If you're in a place where the inflation is at such a rapid pace that prices are almost changing daily or are changing daily, you're going to look for an alternative, which is why a lot of those places will use US dollars and they won't necessarily use their own local currency. And the same thing will happen as the currency, every fiat currency has come to an end throughout human history. It has happened without fail. And as that continues to worsen and accelerate, the people that are producing things that you want are eventually going to demand something else. They're like, I don't want to keep dollars right now. I'll pay me in Bitcoin. And I think it's the producer standpoint basically demanding it. Like, I don't want your Canadian dollars. that is going to continue to push adoption to the broader world and the broader economy. Again, having a neutral currency that you can move between borders without any issue, it's going to replace treasuries as kind of the underlying collateral.
Yeah, it's interesting that we in Canada will issue U.S. dollar denominated bonds, right?
Yep.
Not pesos, not
Yeah.
euros or whatever. I don't know if they've done euros, but U.S. dollars. It just points to that centralization.
Agreed. And even in the interim, I would say, again, I have no idea on the timeline, but I do think it continues to progress in this direction. I think the U.S. dollar will be the last fiat currency, for sure. And I do kind of subscribe to that Brent Johnson dollar milkshake theory that I think realistically you'll see gold and Bitcoin and dollars all going up as other fiat currencies essentially collapse, especially with the issuance of stablecoins, making it really easy for other countries around the world, for other, consumers around the world to just have dollars on their phone. And hopefully they see Bitcoin there too, and they make their way in. I'm not predicting a long future for the Arctic moose shekel.
Yeah, I mean, I've come to that conclusion a while ago as well. Like, at least if it can't be Bitcoin, it can be, U.S. dollar denominated. Yep. But I was going to ask about stablecoins.
Yep.
And I think you kind of gave me the answer, but like, what do you see as the future of stablecoins? Like, and maybe just explain quickly what is a stablecoin and
Sure.
How is it tethered to the U.S. dollar?
Essentially, a stablecoin is another cryptocurrency. And I will iterate right here that I am Bitcoin only. I do not advocate for anything else. I think there's a huge distinction between Bitcoin and crypto. One is a commodity controlled by no one. Everything else is just a centralized scam for the most part. They are Ponzi's, they are scams, they are gambling. They're just trying to get your money. There's no real utility there. Now, with stablecoins in particular, they are hugely popular around the world. You can think of it as a dollar-denominated cryptocurrency that is largely backed by, usually in the case of Tether, backed by Bitcoin and by U.S. treasuries. So what these companies are doing, Tether taking the lead example, is they're buying up short duration bonds, and then they're issuing essentially a casino token, right? They're issuing their own token valued for $1, and then they're just capturing the yield on those short duration bonds. From a business standpoint, it's genius because they have a tiny team and they're ranking in billions. I think last time I looked, it was like 50 billion annually is what they're bringing in right now, just on buying government bonds and then issuing people a casino token for $1. The reason they have so much popularity and the reason you have to meet people currently where they are is, again, we're very blessed to be here in Canada and the US. We have a very high standard of living, and for all its faults, our dollar is still pretty good comparatively. But in other parts of the world, they're desperate for dollars and it's very hard to get them. This is a very easy medium for them to get into dollars. And again, they're not at the point of being able to save. It's very hand to mouth in terms of what they're using, but they want to get out of their local currency. So it's a way to basically continue to export dollars to the rest of the world using a cryptocurrency that's largely backed by U.S. treasuries. My hope is you have wonderful things. For anybody just getting into the space, go check out Aqua Wallet. It's one of my favorites. There's also the Bull app, but it's only on Android at the moment, from the wonderful Bull Bitcoin here in Canada, that you can have. I think Bull app doesn't have necessarily Tether, but in Aqua, you can have USD stablecoins and Bitcoin right on your phone, and you can move in between the two. And I think as kind of a transitionary period, it will be kind of a savings and checking account for a lot of people around the world where their currency is even worse than the Canadian dollar.
Do you see that? Do you see people, they buy their Bitcoin, they get a little bit of US dollar stable coins, and then they're spending, like, are they spending the Bitcoin? Are they spending the US dollars? And
you'll see both kind of depending on where you are in the world, but particularly in like Latin America, there's a lot of stablecoin usage.
And they're just getting out completely out of their local country currency.
Right. It goes back to that, the unbelievable power that comes with being in Bitcoin is even for them, they no longer, because they might not even have banking infrastructure or be able to get a bank account, that their phone becomes their bank. Anybody with a cell phone connected to the network, connected to internet or data in some way, can have basically a bank on their phone without having any sort of an account.
Right.
And so it reminds me of areas of the world that never necessarily had like landlines, like actual telecommunication lines. They're just going right to cell phones. Areas of the world that don't have good banking infrastructure, they're just going right to Bitcoin on Lightning or Liquid usually. Again, you got to meet people where they are. They're at the phase of their life where they're more interested in having dollars in the meantime.
Yeah, and so they're jumping right from their local currency that they might have to hold physically because they don't have a bank account to like the strongest fiat currency and the digitally native Bitcoin that cannot be debased.
Exactly, right? They're going to the best horse at the glue factory.
They're probably a stronger financial position than most North Americans. I don't know.
Well, and that's exactly it too, right? Because I mean, even
that's fascinating.
Their
right?
purchasing power will be up if they're saving in dollars compared to their local currency, right? And then hopefully the nice thing is that, again, going back to those wonderfully aligned incentives, as they can have a better currency and start to save even a little bit more for them, even in U.S. dollars, they'll accrue more purchasing power, and then maybe they'll look at the even better savings vehicle as they continue to develop and expand.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of cool stuff being done. Is it Jamie Garcia as one example? Like the guys who are going out to, like, you know, mountains in Peru, to villages, and showing them, like, look, you can actually sell stuff in Bitcoin and actually save. And, like, what a huge... They wouldn't even dream of going to a bank, right? Basically a barter system, and now they're able to participate in that way. So that's incredible. So you mentioned Aqua. What do you like for, I don't know, for a beginner?
Yep.
What do you recommend for a soft wallet and a hard wallet?
So
what are wallets? What's a wallet?
We're getting a little.
What's a wallet? That's a very good question. Well, essentially, it's a terrible vernacular, but it has stuck, and you can think about where you're keeping Bitcoin. But the important thing to remember is that there's no actual Bitcoin on your device. What your device has is the authorization to spend the Bitcoin to update the ledger. The ledger. Essentially, like, commercial banking is just a ledger that's maintained between different commercial banks and the central bank. And Bitcoin is a publicly available ledger maintained on, like, tens of thousands of computers all around the world. And if you have the private key, that means that you have authorization to update, saying, I have my Bitcoin at this address, and I'm going to send it to another one. But again, the Bitcoin doesn't actually reside on the device. Your control of the Bitcoin does. In terms of, like, software wallet, hot wallet, and when I say hot, I'm just referring to connected to an internet-enabled device. I really do like Aqua. I think that's a wonderful one for people to get started with and get into. It's very simple. It's obfuscating a lot of what's going on to the background to just make a nice, easy interface. I'm going to take the weirdest analogy you probably heard. I don't know if you guys ever played, like, Mario Kart, but I very much so look at it as, like, the Mario character, where it's not the best on everything, but it's pretty good on all things. Right? It's just a very average across the board. And the nice thing about something like Aqua is that that wallet could help you interact with any other wallet in the space, right? You could receive Bitcoin, you could send on Liquid, you could send on Lightning, and those are just kind of different layers that are built upon the Bitcoin network, or a sidechain technically. And you can think of them almost like Visa built on top of dollars, right? Just another way of kind of moving things a little bit faster and cheaper. But because of its all-round flexibility, it's a wonderful place to get started. It even has those two kind of, layer 2 in Bitcoin labeled as checking and savings. And so very easy, very friendly. You are custodying it yourself. There's some nuance there, but again, small amounts, a great place to start. In terms of hardware wallets or going into cold storage, and again, the reference point being there for anyone who's done, like, electrical work, it's like kind of like live and cold and dead wire, or live wire. Cold storage just means not connected to an internet-enabled device, right? It's offline. It's not connected to the internet. The funny thing is that your cold storage wallet will never know your balance. It has no idea how much Bitcoin you have because it's not directly connected to the network. It has to interact through something on your phone or on your desktop in order to send and receive. But without going too much into those details right here, what I'm looking for, and again, there are a lot of options out there, and I don't fault anybody for using whatever they're comfortable with. I'm always very conscientious, and this is really important. In Bitcoin, move slow. Bitcoin is not a move fast and break things. Go slow. Don't be in a rush. Get comfortable. If you're ever in a situation where someone is rushing you, they're scamming you. It's an immediate red flag. And the other thing I just want to hammer home as well, too, is that recovery word, those seed phrases you see when you set up a wallet, those are your Bitcoin private key. You have to treat them like a bearer instrument. Don't take a digital photo of them, because if anyone gets into your iCloud account, they've got everything. Keep them written on paper, get them stamped in metal, but keep those offline. Now, in terms of cold storage, what I'm looking for is that I need it to be open source or source viewable. I want it to have a secure element, which just means it has a chip that's specialized in housing sensitive information. I want to do air gap transactions, which for anyone who's ever done any plumbing, it's like the same reason you wouldn't hardline in a drain. We're purposely having a break so we can control the flow so that stuff doesn't flow back into our equipment from the drain. So air gap transactions. I want to be Bitcoin only, because the more functionality we add, if it's adding support for other things, it means our team isn't focused on security and there's a larger software footprint for something to go wrong. And I need it to have a screen because I want to be able to verify that what I'm signing, what I'm sending is what I think it is. And then additionally from like a reputable company. So in terms of devices that I like, my absolute favorite is the Cold Card Q from CoinKite. They've also got the MK4, Canadian company. These guys are super paranoid crypto anarchists, and what they build and the amount of thought that goes into it and kind of threat vector attack and adversarial thinking is incredible.
You'd never think you would fall in love with super paranoid anarchists until they make a Bitcoin wallet.
Until they make a Bitcoin wallet, and you're super glad that they did. So that is my favorite. And for the two models, security on the same is the exact same. From a security standpoint, they're the same. One just has more functionality, and I enjoy that. Also meeting that criteria, we have the Jade from Blockstream, which is another great one. Good kind of cost. If you're a little bit cost sensitive, it's a good place to go. And there's also the Passport Core from Foundation Devices. I cannot in good conscience recommend the newest model. That's actually the previous model because they added more functionality than I like. But the previous model does still fit that criteria. A lot of people, there's more, let's say, common or popular items that people usually start with as well too. The Trezor is not bad, particularly if you have the Bitcoin only firmware. The thing that it lacks for me is I can't do an air gap transaction, meaning I have to have it directly plugged into my computer, and I prefer to not have these ever directly plugged into my computer. And the other one that does get a bad rep because I don't like some of the decisions they've made, but it's a good transitionary wallet as well too, is you do have the BitKey from Block, from Square, from Jack Dorsey's company there as well too. It's made to be really beginner user friendly. However, I can't get my recovery seeds from it. It is relying on server keys and a hot wallet key, which means two things are online, and I'm not a big fan of that, and it doesn't have a screen. So it's good if you're really apprehensive, but know that I would encourage you to continue learning and plan to transition to something else in the future.
Yeah, I gotta commend you guys for doing the work, but like I recently went through the cold card queue setup, and Ben's videos were really helpful with what is it, Sparrow Wallet?
Yep, that's my favorite on desktop. Yep.
Yeah, so like you said, go slow and learn it is totally all your advice is really wise here. Like, go in and get some, yes, but don't just blaze in and mess things up. Just take the time to learn it. And it's funny, it's almost like a sacred moment. Like,
yeah,
I had this thing like sitting on the package for 2 months. Like, I gotta set this up, but I mean, like, I can't just do it in 20 minutes. I gotta take like a whole afternoon. This is a moment here. So yeah, it's kind of cool once you come to a bit of an understanding of what it is and what you're dealing with. Like, this could be, like you said, a legacy money moment. Like, I don't know, like you put some money on a hard drive, or like, what do you call it, a wallet, and 50 years later, like, who knows what this could be, right?
100%.
Could be in a landfill somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been a few of those. Again, more's been lost than stolen.
Mark's nihilistic self coming out. Mark, where's the optimism, man? Isn't Nathan rubbing off on you, or what?
I own the landfill.
Oh,
there we go.
There's a real estate investor paying off.
And to your point, right? It's a lot to get going. It feels like drinking from a fire hose. The nice thing, and again, with that pairing, with that cold card and Sparrow, what I love about it is that, again, take your time, practice sending, receiving, move some around. But once you're comfortable on that device, and most of the work's at the beginning, once you're comfortable on that device, it's kind of like understanding how a formula is created versus just being able to input the numbers and get the right answer.
Yeah.
You could interact with any Bitcoin wallet, right? It's not obfuscating what's going on in the background. So it's a wonderful learning tool as well to really understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how it's working.
Yeah, it is so profound. You do your first transaction.
Yeah, it's scary.
From a wallet it is scary for sure, but it's also just unreal how, like, look, I authorized this. No one can stop it. It is settling right now. And, I like, the hard part was going to the bank to get them to send money.
I was going to say, from the real estate perspective, from anyone who's ever sent a wire transfer, the ability for you to send billions of dollars if you wanted in 10 minutes on a Sunday at your whim is unbelievable. When you compare those sort of two transactions, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it is very profound. So I'd encourage people, especially a lot of our real estate listeners, to kind of go check it out. Go down the rabbit hole. Fall down the rabbit hole. Oh,
do you have a favorite exchange that you like to hold your Bitcoin on?
I hold none of my Bitcoin on exchanges. Very good call. And that's why I've got two that I recommend that I recommend. We're very fortunate in Canada. There's two that I like. One of them is also in the U.S., but I think the way it's set up is a little bit different. In Canada, in the U.S., because the way that money can be clawed back, they can't do this. It kind of it creates some issues for them. But in Canada, we've got both Bull Bitcoin and we've got Bitcoin Well. And both of those are Bitcoin-only non-custodial exchanges, and they're absolutely wonderful, right? 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I generally work with Bitcoin Mentor, more at the guys at Bull Bitcoin, and BTC Sessions. The channel works is one of our lead sponsors is Bitcoin Well. They're wonderful teams, mission-aligned, Bitcoin-only, but they're non-custodial, which means that when you want to go and purchase Bitcoin, it's very much like brokering a transaction. You have to give them the address of where they're going to send it to. They'll hang on to your fiat, they'll hang on to your Canadian dollars, but essentially you fund your account, and when you go to buy Bitcoin, you have to tell them, please send it to this Bitcoin address. They don't hold it for you, because again, that's not something that we want to encourage.
Yeah, we can't rug you. And here at Two Stewards Show, we recommend Bull Bitcoin, mainly because we get a referral fee if you if you buy from them. So we'll put that in the notes somewhere. But
Show notes down below.
Yeah. So, we're coming up, I think, probably to the end of our time. Brent, what other mind-blowing questions do you have?
Oh, man. Well, we didn't get into the Christianity thing that you mentioned it with your buddy at the beginning, but...
did you ever see him again?
Podcast.
I do talk to him on occasion. I don't see him as much as I want to. Hard with the 3 kids. But yeah, for anyone that's coming from the Christian angle, I think it's The Bible and Bitcoin by... Oh, geez, let me break out his name.
Pastor Coin?
Yep. By Pastor Coin. Thank you very much. Alan Armstrong. There we go.
Yeah, Alan Armstrong.
And we've also got, I believe it's it's Bible and Bitcoin, and then Thank God for Bitcoin from Jimmy Song is another wonderful one as well too. And it really goes, I think it speaks a lot to the equal weights and measures, right? It's a fair and honest system. I think that's where a lot of it aligns as well too. So for whatever reason, these two, there's kind of like the Bitcoin ethos, and I'd say the Christian, what do I say, like, I'm trying to phrase it, like guides for how to act in the world, very closely aligned.
Yeah, like
and
the moral code.
Yeah, it's more like the behavioral aspects of it are very close in alignment. End goals are very much in the same. And the importance of the individual, and definitely even those that are, even Bitcoiners that would consider themselves atheists, it's very much so fellow travelers and trying to get away from how bad things have gotten into a better world.
Yeah, and I think Bitcoin speaks to preserving wealth in this world, but that like the Christian faith is not necessarily focused on this world, right? It's focused on the world to come. So there's an eternal future that when you start talking about saving and storing up treasures. So yeah, that's an interesting overlap, because we've talked about it on the show before, and we've had different Bitcoin people on, and we always notice like there's some spiritual language, like, you're missionaries, you're evangelizing, you're kind of like, there's all these different connections, and it's fascinating. It's like almost like a new kind of community that's being built out. So.
Completely agree. It's kind of like Fight Club. We're kind of like all around the world. You wouldn't even necessarily know that we were there. But even going back to the earlier comments on savings and the importance of savings, is Bitcoin has been unbelievably helpful for so many people, and it's also a lot of Bitcoiners that accrued unbelievable amounts of wealth. And so because now they're in those sort of positions, they can take a step back. They don't have to focus on just trying to keep up, right? They're now ahead, and you see them working on their community, right? It's like once you take care of yourself, you can better take care of your family, and now they're branching out and trying to impact the community as well too. The nice thing is that the reason that I think we've seen such a decline in charity in particular is because people don't have extra money to give out to try and help. And additionally, we've obfuscated that sort of role to the government, which does a terrible role of it as well too. So I think that Bitcoin is a return not only to savings, but to community, individual-led charity, and also the ability to establish kind of legacy for those too. If a charity has a giant stack of Bitcoin, that's essentially a trust that can last them for generations to continue doing their work.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. No, I appreciate it. I don't have anything else to add, Mark, so...
Okay, so there's two ways people can reach you or talk to you or find out more. So you mentioned the one is BTC Sessions, and like the YouTube videos are probably the best.
100%. You can go to YouTube. You can go to btcsessions.ca or youtube.com/BTC Sessions. And honestly, that is every tutorial video you could possibly ever need. Ben has coming up on like 10 years of a repository there, putting out tutorials. It's a wonderful, wonderful place that you can learn anything and everything. And we're constantly updating them and adding new ones. So the free education side, btcsessions.ca/learn. We have some great kind of like beginner, intermediate, and more advanced stuff there. And again, that's all completely free. Work your way through it. And then for anybody that just finds that they're short on time or they'd like somebody to help kind of fast track them through that, you can hit us up at bitcoinmentor.io, where we do basically one-on-one consultations, very much this sort of a setup, and everything is tailored to your needs. I like to have kind of a blend of both the education and kind of tech support and consulting, the goal of which being that by the time we're done, you don't need us anymore, and you could go and show somebody else how to set this up.
That's awesome.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Nathan.
You're very welcome, Mark. Very welcome,
yeah,
Brent.
Appreciate it. And yeah, I don't have any other wise words, so thanks a lot. And until next time,
steward your wealth wisely. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
If you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To learn more about the show, head on over to twostewards.ca and explore our free resources. To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We will see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.
Nailed it.